welcome to my Panopto presentation. In this presentation, we would be talking about Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. Now, if you're like me, you would be wondering, why is this composer who seems Russian is talking about a Middle Eastern character which is Scheherazade, if you know her. If you don't, we'll get to know her throughout this presentation. But to know more about this, we have to look into Korsakov's background. He was born in a wealthy family, so he received a multiple of piano and composing lessons. But his father was a sailor, a Navy officer, so as his brothers, so he followed their path and became a Navy officer himself too. He was born in 1844, the 18th of March, and this is one of the reasons I chose this composer, because we share the same birthday. So maybe I'm his reincarnation right now, and maybe I'm Korsakov explaining his orchestra to you. God knows. Because he was in the sea for so long, he wrote most of his symphonies and during his voyages. And in fact, they became famous pieces in Russia that he decided to take his music passion seriously. That's how he became one of the 5 predominant composers in the Russian Romantic era, and they were called the 5, or as critics call them, the Mighty Handful. These are the 5 who are Mussorgsky, Borodin, Korsakov, our hero today, Balkarev, and Curie. Now, all of these 5 were famous as the nationalistic 5, nationalistic musicians, as they decided to break from the German or the Western music norm in composition, and they decided to incorporate Russian folk, to incorporate Eastern themes, or they decided to incorporate Oriental sentiments in their compositions. That's why this composition itself is called Scheherazade, and you would see the Oriental themes in it. Now, these 5 were also special for something else, which is they were personally close. So, like when Borodin here had a heart attack while he was at a waltz party and he died, Korsakov basically felt so sad and took it on his shoulder to finish all of his unfinished work for him, and publish it in Russia, and it gained so much popularity. And this is all because the 5 decided to represent Russian music in their own way, in their own nationalistic way. Now, Orientalism in here, incorporating Oriental themes in Western music or in Western concepts, has bad connotations most of the time. And the reason for that is, if you trace it back historically, and specifically to Scheherazade's story, Scheherazade's story found its first traces in the 10th century. All right, but the first script for it was found in Syria. Here, Antoine Galland, I hope I'm saying his name right, is a French storyteller. Saw the story of Scheherazade and basically translated it, added his own interpretations or his own I don't know what, and he called it Arabian Nights. In fact, initially the story was called 1001 Nights, but the Western translation of it is what called it Arabian Nights. Now, in here we can say that Korsakov, in his case, because he was a sailor, And he did pass by the Mediterranean Sea and spent quite a long time in there. He he decided to write a composition about Scheherazade and the 1001 Nights, but from his own understanding, from his own scattered image of 1001 Nights. So the orchestra is not literally telling the story, but what's consistent is that he carried out specific themes and he kept them quite neatly. We will see how that happened. But before that, let us know more about Scheherazade. Scheherazade, basically, we're gonna go back to the city where Scheherazade used to live in old Persia, as far as I know. There was a sultan called Sultan Scheherazade, and he believed that all women were deceptive, all women were evil because his wife cheated on him. So what he decided to do is marry a woman every night, and by dawn kill them all, kill them all. So he killed a new woman every dawn, and the executioner would come every dawn and cut somebody new's head, some new woman's head. So basically, the city was getting emptied out of women until Scheherazade was like, okay, I think I can do something about this. And what she decided to do is to go to Sultan and be his new bride for the night. However, she was starting to tell him stories, and this is how the stories of Alf Layla wa Layla started, because Scheherazade would start telling the story all night. And if you know Alf Layla wa Layla, you would know that every story takes you to another story until to another story, and it goes on and on and on, and then it connects you to the last story, and then it goes on and on and on, that they never finish. And that's how the executioner would come at every dawn to kill Scheherazade, but the Sultan Scheherazade is still listening, and he wants to know what's the end of all of these stories. So this is how Scheherazade survives throughout Alf Layla wa Layla, or throughout this piece itself. So Scheherazade and the Sultan, we hear them in the story speaking. What are they speaking about? They're speaking about 4 stories, which are in this orchestra. They're translated into 4 movements. The first movement is the sea and Sindbad's ship, the tale of the calendar prince and the young princess and the prince and the princess. And the fourth and last story and movement is the festival of Baghdad. Now, let's start with Scheherazade telling the story and to the Sultan. Okay, all right. Let's hear the Sultan. Sultan. Yeah, we were shocked by. We start the composition. The orchestra starts with this very bold, very harsh sound, and you can safely say that this is the Sultan's rough sound, who executes a woman every dawn, and he's like saying, "Yes, I'm here. What you gonna tell me? What are we going to do? You know?" And here comes her sound. Here comes her sound. And it's such an interesting sound because it's a very familiar sound. As soon as I heard it, I was like, I think I heard this before. Scheherazade's voice now is is represented by the solo virtuosic, I hope I'm saying it right, virtuosic solo, violin solo, and it's a very soft, very feminine sound that starts telling a story, as you would hear the sound going to, let's leave it in the background. You would hear the sound going into different variations, and this is how Scheherazade starts telling the new story. Okay, so here she starts telling the story of the sea and Sindbad's ship. You can hear a story that's accompanied by adventure, accompanied by the sea, accompanied by because this is the story of Sindbad. He is a sailor like Korsakov himself, who is seeking adventure and discovering new lands and wonders. So this is the first movement in this piece, and it's about Sindbad. So you hear this melody now? You hear this melody? This is the main melody that Korsakov's going to adopt throughout this movement. What he does is just infinite variations, infinite developing. It just develops and goes to just layers of this melody. It's crazy. And then one interesting thing about this movement is how Korsakov is able to draw the waves of the sea in our imagination so vividly. Let's go to second 332. Let's hear the waves. Keeps on increasing. You hear the crescendo, and it doesn't end. It doesn't end because he's representing the waves. Even the music sheet itself looks like sea waves, and it's quite interesting how he decided to paint the waves in E minor. And E minor, was it? I think it was E minor. He decided, or E major. I think it was E major. Because he saw the waves as this specific chord, and he painted it quite perfectly, and it suited it quite well, because I personally saw it in my head too. And this is the story of Sindbad. So as we saw, Scheherazade first speaks. Scheherazade starts telling the story. She takes us to the first movement, which is the sea and Sindbad's ship. He paints a perfect picture in allegro, and then he moves to the second movement. Alright, let's see how the second movement starts. Okay, 12:10. All of this is the first movement, okay? 12:10. This is how the second movement starts. It starts with Scheherazade's same voice. However, now if you hear it, it's more affirmative, it's more strong than it was. And it's accompanied, Scheherazade's voice is always accompanied by 3-chord hypnotic effect of a harp, and they say that he incorporated this because The harp is a very old instrument that's always incorporated in um, in stories and fantasies and old, I don't know what. You know what I mean. So in here we see how affirmatively she starts, and she's not afraid to go to different variations, you know. She's speaking, she's alive through the next day. And she starts telling the story right immediately. The second story is, I like the second story so much, is the tale of the Calendar Prince. The Calendar Prince is represented in this orchestra using the woodwind family. The bassoon in here, and you will see how the same melody would be played and refined, tweaked by the oboe as well. And this is what he does throughout this entire movement. This is what he does throughout the entire movement. He takes the melody, he changes it, develops it, takes it to different variations throughout the entire movement, and it's quite interesting until you get it into a part that is filled with intensity, the intensity of the brass and percussions. And if I can show it to you, it would be amazing. You hear this? It's more of a warning sound, like, because I wondered about this and I went back to the calendar story, the calendar prince, and his story is actually interesting because he's a prince from a wealthy family. He's literally a prince who decided to cover up as a beggar because he was kind of seeking to go on an adventure and revealing secrets of life and all of that. And while he was doing that in his journey, he realized how harsh life is like for the normal person, the normal middle class. I want to say middle class person because not middle class, just just not the royal, because throughout while he was on his journey he got blinded, and I think this resembles the horrific I don't know, adventure. Now by the end of this movement, Scheherazade enters for a last time. It's as if in this second movement we can see how she enters in the beginning and in the end of the story, as if she's تختم القصة, she's ending the story. Let's see, 12:10. It says 12:10 in here. 24. It's interesting in here. Let's just see this. Because this is the first time we hear Scheherazade's voice in the cello. I don't know what is that. But this is how she ends basically the second story, and this is how Korsakov ends the second movement. Now, to go back, now after ending the previous movement, the second movement and story like that. He starts the third story or movement in a very different way because he takes us to a complete different world that is very romantic. Everything sounds different. Even Scheherazade herself doesn't speak like we got used to her speaking. And this movement is just um, Korsakov telling the story of the romantic story of the prince and the princess. And we should see even now how the players in the orchestra themselves, they look completely happy and completely different playing this one. Let's see. As you can see, it has a different feeling, a different theme, different sentiment than the previous movements, and even I find it very interesting, and I question why Scheherazade chose to tell chose to make the third story a romantic story. Just before she ended the fourth story, she decided to make the one before romantic, and I wonder if this has to do with the fact that she still survived from the king's execution. So as you can see, we have a certain melody in here. This melody is basically, as Korsakov himself said, this melody specifically using the strings family is basically the sound of the prince, and then the clarinet comes and speaks in the sound in the princess in the sound of the princess. And it's also actually rumored that the previous, the 2 seconds clarinet playing that we just saw is actually an interpretation. They interpreted it as kisses between the prince and the princess in this third movement. Now, this third movement itself is special because, as we said, it doesn't even have Shahrazade's voice, and he takes us to a completely different world with so many layers, so many romantic layers that are played in the chord of G major, which is such a happy chord, such a romantic chord, you know. It's not like any of the other pieces, any of the other movements that we listened to before. What is actually very famous about this movement as well is how he builds for a perfect climax. If we can see here, you see how he builds for a perfect climax after he incorporates Shahrazade's voice in the end, as if she's commenting on it. And here, this is the end of the story. Now we should see how after Shahrazade's voice, we hear an entire climax by the whole orchestra, and we should see it right now. Then Look at that. Listen to the huge climax. He remains the same variations. He keeps the same variations of the same melody until he ends this movement, which is the most romantic I've ever heard. And then after that, Scheherazade takes us to the fourth story. Now, the fourth story, or the fourth movement, is called The Festival at Baghdad, the Shipwreck on the Rock. Now, remember the sound of the Sultan that we heard in the beginning, which was very bold, very harsh, and very, very scary? It returns back, and you should see now in minute 37:28 how still firm it is, how still scary it is. As if, here, 28, as if he's no more patient. He lost his patience because of all of the stories that Scheherazade is telling him about, and all of the stories that lead to other stories. And it's been 1001 nights, and Scheherazade is still not dead. She's still alive, and she's still telling him stories, and he still didn't get the coda, the conclusion of these stories. So you can hear his impatience in here. Again. And here we hear Scheherazade's voice. And listen. It feels very abrupt, very trembling, and because of the Sultan's impatience. So what she does here, if you know Alf Layla wa Layla, then you know that after telling all of these stories, because as we said, the story leads to another one, to a third one, to a fourth one, and then it takes you back to the first one. What Scheherazade does on the last night is a recap, as putting everything that she has mentioned back together into making sense again. So Korsakov himself does the same thing again, because this what we're hearing now we heard this before. We heard this melody before, and in Sindbad and the ship's story, because this is what he does in the last movement. In the fourth movement, he recaps the story of Sindbad. You have a sudden recap of the story of the Sindbad in 38:52, and also the story of the Calendar Prince. If we go to minute 40, well, we should listen to him right now. We should listen to the recap of it. Do you remember? Remember this? We said that the story of the calendar is represented in the woodwind family, and He's recapping it again. He's recapping it again. He's bringing the story of the calendar prince that was told using the woodwind family. He's bringing it again in the last movement. So um, um, but in here, since he makes a recap, he he also we said he also tells the story of Sindibad. Remember how Sindibad's story or Sindibad's movement and signature, where the waves were the perfect representation of the waves. Now, for some reason, um, the the ship of Sindibad is now in a shipwreck. So we're gonna hear now the same waves followed by wrecks and wrecks and wrecks and wrecks, and it's just crazy how he was able to resemble that in this orchestra. We should see it in 4538, and you should really see exactly what he means by a shipwreck. 4538. طبعا all of this is the same melody, the same recap, with also his layers and development of melody. He carries it throughout the orchestra, and I find it really nice how he uses literally every instrument in the orchestra, including that triangle thing, and even this diff daff. 45. If you remember, you can see how this is the exact same melody of the waves. Now, what's different is that he added the percussions and the heavy percussions, and you can really see the shipwreck. The ship is not sailing anymore in the sea. The ship is getting wrecked left and right, and you can hear it from the percussion. All right. So after he does this recap and after he does this heavy recap, it's as if Scheherazade herself is recapping the stories to bring us to the coda. So we hear the Sultan speaking for the last time, and I wonder how would the Sultan sound like after Scheherazade just finished the story, right? Scheherazade just finished telling the four stories, and the fourth movement is just is a recap of all of that. It's just the coda of the stories. She finished telling the stories, so we hear the Sultan's opinion in minute 47 with his, as we know, we are used to his sound being the heavy, the bold bass and brass, harsh sound. We should see how he sounds right now. 47, 16, 702. So we basically heard his bold, harsh sound for one last brief moment, and somehow it decreases. You have a gradual diminuendo. I hope I'm saying it, decrescendo, and this, as we saw, this gradual diminuendo goes into melts into Scheherazade's voice, and then here soft diminuendo followed by a final violin solo. The violin solo, as we know, is always Scheherazade's voice. We hear Scheherazade speaking one last time, maybe. If you focus really well, this same melody that we're hearing in the background of Scheherazade's sound, that's played by the rest of the strings family, is actually the first sound that we heard between the first melody we heard between the bold and harsh uh, voice of Sultan and the soft feminine voice of Scheherazade. In between was this I don't want to say intense, I want to say suspenseful, suspenseful, uh, I don't know, kind of uh, a melody that is in a state of waiting of what's going to happen next. It's literally the sound of the Sultan. Huh. It's the same sound of his, but except now it has decreased. It's less bold, less harsh, less angry, and it's more calm, more balanced. This is literally the sound. This is this sound is the suspenseful, full of suspense sound between Scheherazade and the Sultan's voice, and then she speaks again. So what do we get from this? What do we get from this? The fourth movement is impatient Sultan. He wants to know what's happening. What's the next story? She makes a recap. She tells him the conclusion of the stories of all of these stories. Uh, and Korsakov represents uh, the shipwreck in like he. It's crazy how he is capable of portraying uh, a ship in the sea and in the first movement, and then portraying the same ship in a complete state of wreck, you know, using the precautions. The Sultan speaks, he sounds less harsh, less bold with time, the same background melody that is always between the conversation of the Sultan and Shahrazad is there because this is an important moment for Shahrazad because it's either it's either they fall in love and they get married, they're already married. They either fall in love and the Sultan sees the beauty of the woman, or she gets killed by the executioner who is just waiting by the door. The Sultan speaks. He still has the same sound, but the sound is tamed. The sound is not as angry as it used to be. Shahrazad gets to speak once again, and do you see the long movement that the solo, the very sharp, it was a very sharp sound uh, that the violinist that's representing Shahrazad's voice makes. I think it's quite cool how we hear Shahrazad now uh, for a longer time, and this longer time is not just not just different variations of Shahrazad's voice. It's just consistency. It's just the same note, the same chord, and it's consistent because she's alive. She's not dead. She pursued the. She basically saved herself, saved the town, and saved the king from his doubt. She lives. The code after her sound, the coda comes, and it's such a soft, calm coda that goes like that just a soft, calm coda that comes after the storm. Literally, the shipwreck and the storm. And and this is and this is it. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I know it was a long presentation. I hope I hope it wasn't boring and you actually benefited from this. Um, there's still one last question that I must answer, which is why did I specifically choose this orchestra? It's because I really, really, really used to like reading Alf Layla و Layla, and I remember this time in my life where it was all I had. I think it was 2011, and the conflict, the conflict back home was getting really crazy, and it was right underneath our house. So right underneath our house, we can hear the soldiers and the dead people and everything. But whatever, we flee to our other family's house, and I really didn't like the people. I really didn't like the people that we were staying with, but I really liked their library because they had Alf Layla و Layla, and they are two huge, huge, huge books that like part one is this huge and part two is this huge. I didn't manage to read part two, but I read part one, and I read it throughout the 6 months that we were staying, that we were displaced in into their house, and it was very weird. as soon as I finished the first book, we returned back to our house. So that's why I chose Alf Layla wa Layla. One thing that's worthy of mentioning that all of these illustrations are by Edmond Dulac, and it's said that he made all of these illustrations not only it's this one, it's this one and this one, and it wasn't only based on the 1001 Nights stories. It was also based on Korsakov's orchestra, Scheherazade itself. And you can see in here, these are the persecutioners killing the woman. Look at them. And these are these are the scared women, ya haram. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and bye bye.